I thought they were my friends. Real friends. The kind who had your back, who laughed at your jokes, who made you feel like you belonged. But that illusion shattered in the span of 30 seconds when I stood frozen outside Jake's apartment door, my hand hovering over the handle I'd just released to grab my forgotten phone from my car. Their voices drifted through the crack I'd left open, casual and cruel in equal measure. The sound of their laughter mixed with words I never expected to hear, especially not about me. My fingers went numb around the doorknob as Marcus's voice cut through the air like a knife I hadn't seen coming. Every muscle in my body tensed as I realized what was happening, but I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except stand there and listen to my world crumble. She dresses like she's begging for it, Marcus said, and the others laughed. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I had worn a simple sundress that day, the yellow one with tiny flowers that my mom had bought me for my birthday. It was cute and comfortable, nothing scandalous, nothing that should have invited this kind of commentary. But apparently, to them, it was evidence of something darker, something desperate. My heart stopped completely when I heard Jake's voice join in, the same Jake who had helped me move into my dorm, who had stayed up late helping me study for exams, who I had trusted with my deepest secrets and biggest fears. Total SL vibes, Jake added, and I felt my stomach drop to the floor. She's probably dying to sleep with one of us. The casual way he said it made everything worse somehow. There was no hesitation in his voice, no guilt, no awareness that what he was saying was wrong. He sounded so comfortable, so confident in his assessment of me, like he had given this considerable thought and arrived at this conclusion through careful observation. I wanted to scream, to throw open the door and demand to know how he could say such things about someone he called a friend. But my voice was trapped somewhere deep in my chest, suffocated by shock and betrayal, and a hurt so profound I couldn't even begin to process it. I couldn't breathe. The hallway suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in around me as their voices continued inside the apartment. Tyler's laugh joined the chorus, that distinctive snorting sound he made when he found something particularly funny. He was laughing at me. They were all laughing at me. These were the guys I had spent countless hours with, watching movies, playing video games, grabbing late-night food, sharing stories about our families and our dreams. I had felt safe with them, protected even, like having a group of brothers who would look out for me in this overwhelming college experience. I had never once felt like I needed to guard myself around them or watch what I wore or said. These were the guys I'd trusted, the ones I'd considered my closest friends for 2 years. 2 entire years of my life had been built on what I now realized was a complete lie. Every memory I had with them was now tainted, corrupted by this new knowledge of what they really thought about me. Had they always seen me this way? When we went to the beach last summer and I wore a normal bikini, were they making these same comments when I went to get us drinks? When I borrowed Jake's hoodie because I was cold at the football game, did they think I was trying to be provocative somehow? My mind raced through every interaction, every moment, searching for signs I should have seen, warnings I had missed that would have told me these people were not who they pretended to be. And this was what they really thought of me. Not that I was funny or smart or a good friend. Not that I was the person who always showed up when they needed someone to talk to, or the one who remembered everyone's coffee orders and favorite snacks. No, to them I was just a body dressed in clothes they deemed too revealing, a collection of assumptions and judgments based on nothing but their own twisted perceptions. The realization made me feel dirty somehow, like I needed to shower and scrub away every moment I had spent in their presence. I thought about all the times I had hugged them goodbye or fallen asleep during movie marathons with my head on someone's shoulder, innocent gestures that now felt contaminated by their actual thoughts about me. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, trying to steady myself as more words floated through the door. I bet she's hooked up with half the guys in our dorm, someone said. I couldn't even tell who anymore because my ears were ringing so loudly. Girls who dress like that are usually pretty easy. Another voice added something about me probably having low self-esteem and seeking validation through male attention. The amateur psychology of it all would have been laughable if it wasn't so painful. They had constructed this entire narrative about who I was without ever once asking me about my actual thoughts, feelings, or experiences. To them, my clothes told them everything they needed to know about my character, my morals, my worth as a human being. My phone buzzed in my hand, startling me so badly I nearly dropped it. It was a text from my little sister asking how my day was going, if I was having fun with my friends. The irony of the timing was almost too much to bear. How could I explain this to her? How could I tell her that the people I had talked about constantly, the ones I had brought home for Thanksgiving and introduced to our parents, were actually saying these horrible things about me behind my back? My sister looked up to me, thought I had it all figured out in college with my great friends and busy social life. What would she think if she knew the truth? Would she lose faith in people, in friendship, in the possibility of trusting anyone at all? I realized I was still standing in the hallway like an idiot, exposed and vulnerable if anyone came by or if one of them decided to open the door. My legs felt like they were made of lead as I forced myself to move, to back away from that door and the toxic conversation happening behind it. Each step felt impossible, like I was walking through thick mud that threatened to pull me under. Part of me wanted to stay and hear more, to collect every terrible thing they said so I would have proof, evidence that this was really happening, and not some horrible nightmare I would wake up from. But the bigger part of me just wanted to run, to get as far away as possible from these people who had pretended to care about me while harboring such ugly thoughts. By the time I made it to my car, I was shaking so hard I could barely get the key in the ignition. Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not where someone might see me and ask what was wrong. How could I even begin to explain what had just happened? The words felt too big and too terrible to speak out loud, like saying them would make them more real somehow. I sat there in the parking lot, staring at Jake's building through the windshield, and wondered how I was supposed to go back to normal after this. How was I supposed to face them tomorrow or the next day, knowing what I knew? And the worst question of all, the one that made my chest ache with a pain I had never experienced before, was how many other conversations like this had there been that I hadn't overheard. Every instinct screamed at me to burst through that door and confront them, but my body wouldn't move. It was like I had become a statue, frozen in that hallway, unable to do anything except stand there and absorb every poisonous word that came through that crack in the door. My brain was sending signals to my legs to move, to my hand to push open that door, to my mouth to yell at them and demand answers, but nothing was working. The disconnect between what I wanted to do and what I was physically capable of doing was terrifying. I had always thought of myself as someone who would stand up for themselves, who wouldn't take this kind of disrespect lying down, but here I was paralyzed by shock and hurt, unable to do anything except be a silent witness to my own character assassination. I stood there, phone clutched in my trembling hand, listening to them dissect every outfit choice, every friendly gesture, twisting them into evidence of some desperate sexual agenda I'd never had. Marcus brought up the time I had worn ripped jeans and a crop top to the campus carnival last month, saying I was clearly trying to get attention. Tyler mentioned how I always laughed at their jokes, claiming it was obvious flirting and not just me being a friendly person who enjoyed their company. Even the way I said goodbye, with quick hugs that lasted maybe 2 seconds, was analyzed and determined to be proof of my supposed intentions. Everything I did was being filtered through this disgusting lens where normal human behavior became evidence in their case against my character. They were taking moments I remembered fondly and turning them into something dirty and shameful. They debated which one of them I wanted most, and I wanted to vomit right there in the hallway. Jake argued that I definitely had a thing for him because I had asked to borrow his notes from biology class 3 times this semester. Marcus countered that I was obviously into him because I had complimented his new haircut last week. Tyler threw his hat in the ring by pointing out that I had agreed to be his partner for the group project in psychology, which apparently meant I was desperate to spend time alone with him. The narcissism of it all was staggering. These grown men actually believed that every interaction with a woman had to have romantic or sexual undertones, that a girl couldn't possibly just want to be friends or needed help with schoolwork, or was giving a genuine compliment without ulterior motives. They rated my body like I was livestock at an auction, and something inside me died listening to it. Numbers were thrown around with casual cruelty as they discussed different parts of my body, debating scores like they were judges on some perverted game show. My face was a 7 but could be an 8 with different makeup. My legs were a 9 but only when I wore heels. Comments about my chest and other body parts were even more explicit and degrading, reducing me to nothing more than a collection of parts to be evaluated and ranked according to their preferences. I had never felt so dehumanized in my entire life. These were people who had seen me cry over a failed exam, who had heard me talk about my dreams of becoming a teacher, who knew about my volunteer work at the animal shelter. But none of that mattered to them in this moment, because apparently, my value was determined solely by how physically attractive they found me. And the worst part? They sounded so comfortable, like this wasn't the first time they'd had this conversation. There was an ease to their discussion, a familiar rhythm that suggested this was a regular topic when I wasn't around. They jumped from point to point without explanation, referencing previous conversations with phrases like, remember what we said last time, and like we talked about before. How many times had they done this? How many hangouts had ended with them gathering to discuss my body and my clothes and my intentions once I left? The thought made my skin crawl. Every time I had said goodbye and driven home feeling grateful for such good friends, they had probably waited exactly 5 minutes before starting this same degrading conversation. I had been so blind, so stupidly trusting. Someone whose voice I didn't immediately recognize, maybe it was Chris who had joined our group more recently, asked if anyone had actually tried to hook up with me. The question hung in the air for a moment before Jake responded that he had thought about it, but didn't want to deal with the drama afterward. Marcus said I probably wasn't worth the effort because girls who dressed like me were usually disappointing in real life. The casual way they discussed pursuing me sexually, like it was as simple as deciding whether to order pizza or Chinese food, made me feel sick. I wasn't a person to them with feelings and autonomy. I was a potential conquest to be weighed against the inconvenience factor. The disrespect was so profound I couldn't even fully process it while standing there in that hallway. My hand was cramping from clutching my phone so tightly, but I couldn't seem to loosen my grip. It was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become completely unrecognizable. I looked down at the screen and saw my reflection in the black glass, a ghostly outline of a girl who had walked into this building 20 minutes ago, thinking she knew who her friends were. That girl seemed impossibly naive now, almost childish in her trust and openness. How had I not seen this coming? Were there signs I had ignored or explained away because I wanted so badly to believe that guys and girls could really be just friends without all this toxic garbage underneath? My mom had warned me about boys in college, but I had rolled my eyes and told her my friends weren't like that they respected me. The memory of that conversation made me want to cry. Tyler's voice rose above the others, saying something about how all girls who dressed provocatively were just insecure and needed male validation to feel good about themselves. He had taken one psychology class and suddenly thought he was qualified to diagnose every woman's motivations and mental state. The irony of a group of men sitting around objectifying a woman while claiming she was the one seeking male attention was apparently lost on all of them. They continued building their theory about me, each one adding observations and conclusions, constructing this elaborate fictional version of who I was and what I wanted. It was like listening to strangers talk about someone I had never met, except the person they were describing was supposed to be me. The disconnect was dizzying and disorienting. I heard Jake say my name again, this time in a different context, something about how I was always texting him and how it was getting kind of annoying, actually. The rewriting of history was happening in real time. I didn't text him any more than he texted me. We had a normal friend dynamic where we sent each other funny memes and made plans to hang out, exactly like he did with the guys. But now it was being reframed as me being clingy and desperate for his attention. Everything about our friendship was being reinterpreted through the worst possible lens, and there was nothing I could do to stop it because I wasn't supposed to be hearing any of this. They felt completely free to say whatever they wanted because they thought they were in a safe space where their true feelings wouldn't have consequences. Finally, my body started responding to my brain's commands again, but not in the way I expected. Instead of righteous anger pushing me through that door to confront them, it was self-preservation pulling me backward, away from the source of pain. My feet began moving in reverse, slowly at first and then faster, putting distance between myself and that apartment like it was a building on fire. I needed to get out of there before someone opened the door and saw me standing in the hallway with tears streaming down my face and my whole world shattered into pieces at my feet. I needed to get somewhere safe where I could fall apart without an audience, where I could process what had just happened without having to maintain any kind of composure. The confrontation would have to wait because right now, I was barely holding myself together. I backed away from the door as quietly as possible, my vision blurring with tears I refused to let fall. Not yet, not where they might see. Each step backward felt like an eternity, and I was terrified that at any moment the door would swing open and one of them would catch me standing there, with my heart breaking all over my face. The hallway seemed impossibly long suddenly, stretching out behind me like something from a nightmare where you run and run but never get anywhere. I focused on staying silent, on not letting my breathing get too loud or my footsteps echo on the tile floor. The last thing I wanted was for them to know I had heard everything. Some small part of me still cared about not making things awkward, which was insane considering what they had just said about me. But old habits die hard, and I had spent 2 years being the easygoing friend who never caused drama. My back finally hit the wall near the stairwell, and I let myself lean against it for just a moment, trying to catch my breath and calm my racing heart. The tears were pushing harder now, demanding to be released, but I bit down on my lip hard enough to taste copper and force them back. I would not cry in this building where any of their neighbors could walk by and ask what was wrong. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing how much their words had destroyed me, even though they didn't know I had heard them. The only power I had left in this situation was the element of surprise, the fact that I knew their true feelings while they still thought I was clueless. If I fell apart now, if someone saw me and mentioned it to them, that small advantage would be gone. I made it to my car and just drove. No destination in mind. Hands shaking on the wheel so badly I probably shouldn't have been driving at all. But I needed to move. Needed to put distance between myself and that apartment building that had become the site of my worst betrayal. The familiar streets of campus blurred past my windows as I turned randomly at intersections, not caring where I ended up as long as it was away from there. My mind was still back in that hallway, still processing what I had heard, still trying to reconcile the friends I thought I knew with the people who had said those terrible things. How could both versions exist in the same people? Or had I just been fooling myself this whole time, seeing what I wanted to see instead of what was really there? The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if I could feel anything other than this crushing weight in my chest. I ended up in the parking lot of a grocery store about 15 minutes from campus, pulling into a spot far away from other cars where I could have some privacy. My hands were still trembling as I shifted into park and turned off the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. Without the sound of the car and the traffic to distract me, there was nothing to keep my thoughts at bay anymore. They crashed over me like a wave, all the hurt and anger and confusion I had been holding back. And I finally let myself cry. My phone started buzzing in the cup holder where I had thrown it, and I watched through blurry eyes as Jake's name appeared on the screen. The first text was casual, almost cheerful, asking where I had gone and if I was okay. The cognitive dissonance of reading his concerned message while remembering what he had said about me minutes earlier made me feel like I was losing my mind. How could he switch between those two versions of himself so easily? Was he really worried about me, or was this just part of the performance, the act he put on to maintain our fake friendship? I stared at the screen until it went dark, unable to formulate any response that wouldn't immediately give away that something was terribly wrong. The phone buzzed again, and this time it was a longer message wondering if I was coming back because they had ordered pizza and gotten my favorite kind. The casual normalcy of his text made my stomach turn violently, and for a moment I thought I might actually be sick. Just minutes ago, he had been rating my body and discussing whether I was worth hooking up with, and now he was texting me about pizza like we were normal friends doing normal friend things. The duplicity was staggering. How could he compartmentalize so completely? Did he not feel any guilt or shame about the way he talked about me when I wasn't around? Or was this just how he viewed all his female friends, maintaining a friendly facade while harboring these degrading thoughts underneath? How could he type those words after what he'd just said about me? The question repeated in my mind like a broken record as more texts came through, each one more casual and friendly than the last. Marcus had joined in now, sending a gif of someone looking confused with a caption wondering where their friend had disappeared to. Tyler added a message saying the pizza was getting cold and I was missing out on the good slices. They were all acting so normal, so unchanged by the conversation they had just had, while I was sitting in a grocery store parking lot feeling like my entire world had collapsed. The disconnect between their reality and mine was so vast it felt like we were living in different universes entirely. I wanted to scream at them through the phone, to send a message telling them exactly what I had overheard and demanding an explanation. My fingers hovered over the keyboard multiple times, typing and deleting various versions of confrontational texts. But something stopped me each time. Maybe it was fear of their response, of them gaslighting me or telling me I had misunderstood or overreacted. Maybe it was the knowledge that once I sent that message, there was no going back, no pretending this hadn't happened, no possibility of salvaging anything from the wreckage of our friendship. Or maybe it was just that I was so emotionally exhausted I couldn't handle a confrontation right now, couldn't face their excuses and denials when I was barely holding myself together. Another text came through, this time from Jake saying he was starting to get worried and asking if I had made it home safely. The false concern made me want to throw my phone out the window. He didn't actually care about my safety or my well-being. If he did, he wouldn't have said those things about me. He wouldn't have participated in reducing me to a collection of body parts and assumptions. This worry was just about maintaining appearances, about being able to tell himself he was a good guy who checked on his friends. It was a performance for his own benefit more than mine, a way to absolve himself of any guilt without actually changing his behavior or attitudes. I could see that now with a clarity that came from having the veil ripped away. I finally sent back a simple message saying I wasn't feeling well and had gone home, that I would talk to them later. It was vague enough to be believable, but gave me an excuse to avoid them while I figured out what to do next. The response was immediate. A chorus of feel-better messages and offers to bring me super medicine, more performances of friendship that I now knew were hollow. I turned my phone face down on the passenger seat so I wouldn't have to see any more messages, and leaned my head back against the headrest. The tears had slowed, but my face felt swollen and my head was pounding from crying. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror and barely recognized the person staring back, red-eyed and devastated. Nothing like the happy girl who had walked into that apartment building less than an hour ago. I couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? The thought circled my mind like a vulture as I finally drove home in the dark. My tears dried into tight, itchy tracks on my cheeks. These guys were beloved on campus, the kind of people everyone wanted to be friends with. Jake was the charming one who volunteered at the community center and always held doors open for people. Marcus was the funny guy who could make an entire room laugh, who organized charity events and had a smile for everyone. Tyler was the smart, thoughtful one who helped people with their homework and was always willing to listen to problems. They had carefully crafted these images of themselves as good guys and everyone bought it completely. If I came forward with my story about overhearing them, would anyone actually take my side? Or would they find ways to excuse the behavior? To blame me somehow for not taking a joke or being too sensitive? They were the popular ones, the charming guys everyone loved, and I was just another girl in their orbit. That was the reality of the situation, and it made me feel small and powerless. I thought about who I could possibly tell and came up empty. My roommate barely knew them and would probably just say to drop them as friends, which was practical advice but didn't address the deeper hurt I was feeling. My other friends from class weren't close enough to understand the full context of how much this betrayal meant. My parents would freak out and probably want to call the school or confront the guys themselves, which would only make everything worse. I felt completely alone with this knowledge, trapped in a nightmare that only I could see while everyone else went about their lives thinking these guys were great people. I was just the girl who dressed provocatively, never mind that I wore the same clothes as half the girls on campus. That was what they would say if I told anyone. I was sure of it. They would point to my clothes as evidence that I was somehow asking for their commentary, that I had invited their objectification by daring to wear a sundress or jeans that fit me properly. The victim blaming would be immediate and brutal, and I could already hear the questions that would come. What were you wearing? Are you sure you didn't misunderstand? Maybe they were just joking around? Boys will be boys, you know how guys talk. The imagined responses made me angry and hopeless at the same time because I knew how these situations typically played out, especially when it was a well-liked group of guys against one girl's word. I spent the night replaying every interaction, every hangout, wondering what else they'd said when I wasn't around. Sleep was impossible even though my body was exhausted from the emotional trauma of the evening. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, watching shadows move across the paint as cars passed on the street below, and my mind tortured me with memories that now felt contaminated. I remembered the pool party at Marcus's house over the summer where we had all gone swimming and stayed up late around the fire pit. Had they commented on my swimsuit after I left? Had they rated my body while I was driving home feeling grateful for such fun friends? The memory that had once been happy now felt sick and twisted, poisoned by what I now knew about their true thoughts. Every movie night we had ever had came back to me in excruciating detail, and I wondered if they had made comments every single time. When I fell asleep during that superhero marathon and woke up with a blanket over me, had they discussed my body while I was unconscious and vulnerable? When I wore that new sweater I was excited about and they said it looked nice, were they actually making judgments about how it fit me? Every compliment was now suspicious, every friendly gesture potentially hiding ulterior motives or degrading thoughts. It was like someone had gone back through my memory and drawn mustaches on all the photos, defacing every good moment I had with them until nothing felt pure or real anymore. Had they always seen me this way? The question haunted me more than any other because I desperately wanted to believe there had been a time when our friendship was genuine. Maybe in the beginning, when we first met in that freshman orientation group and bonded over our shared hatred of the icebreaker games. Maybe during that first semester when we studied together and explored campus and everything was new and innocent. I wanted to believe that something had been real, that I hadn't been completely fooling myself for 2 entire years. But the comfort level of their conversation, the ease with which they discussed me, suggested this had been going on for a long time, maybe from the very beginning. Maybe I had never actually been their friend at all, just an object they kept around for entertainment. Was our entire friendship a lie, or had something changed? I tried to pinpoint a moment when things might have shifted, an event or conversation that could have triggered this toxic dynamic. Had I done something that made them start seeing me differently? The thought made me angry at myself for even going there, for trying to find a way to blame myself for their disgusting behavior. It didn't matter what I had done or worn or said. Nothing justified the way they talked about me. But still, my brain kept searching for an explanation, some logical reason why people I cared about would betray me so completely. Maybe it was easier to think something had changed rather than accept that I had been blind to their true nature all along. Around 3 a.m, I got up and looked at myself in the mirror, really looked at what I was wearing and how I presented myself. I had on old sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt from a 5K I had run in high school, nothing remotely provocative or attention-seeking. But earlier that day I had worn a sundress, and apparently that was enough to make them think I was desperate for their sexual attention. I opened my closet and stared at my clothes, all the outfits I had put together thinking they were cute and expressive of my personality. Were they all evidence in the case against me? Would people look at my wardrobe and agree with the guys that I was dressing inappropriately? The doubt they had planted in my mind was growing like a weed, making me question everything about myself. I pulled out the sundress I had worn and held it up, trying to see it through their eyes. It was yellow with small flowers, hit just above my knee, had a modest neckline, and made me feel pretty and confident. There was nothing objectively wrong with it. Half the girls I passed on campus daily wore similar dresses or shorter skirts or tighter tops, and nobody called them names or assumed things about their character. But somehow, on me, this dress became evidence of moral failing. The unfairness of it made me want to scream into my pillow so I wouldn't wake my roommate in the next room. Why did women have to constantly police what they wore to avoid being judged, while men could say whatever vile things they wanted about us and face no consequences? My phone kept lighting up throughout the night with messages in our group chat, and each notification felt like a knife twisting in an already open wound. They were making plans for the weekend, sharing memes, having normal conversations like nothing had happened. Because for them, nothing had happened. They had no idea their world was about to change, that I knew their secret and everything between us was irreparably broken. I watched the messages pile up, unable to participate but unable to look away either. It was like watching actors in a play perform their roles, knowing that everything I was seeing was fake but being unable to stop the show. Marcus sent a funny video and everyone reacted with laughing emojis. Jake made a joke about his chemistry professor. Tyler asked if anyone wanted to play basketball tomorrow. It was also horrifyingly normal, and I realized this was what it would be like from now on, me knowing the truth while they continued their performance, expecting me to play along like I always had. Monday came and I had to face them, and the dread I felt was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. The weekend had passed in a blur of anxiety and overthinking, with me barely leaving my dorm room except to grab food when I knew the dining hall would be mostly empty. I had practiced in the mirror how to smile naturally, how to laugh at the right moments, how to be the version of myself they expected to see. It felt insane, rehearsing friendship like it was a role in a school play, but I needed to be convincing. If they suspected I knew anything, if they saw how completely they had devastated me, I would lose what little control I had left in this situation. So I put on jeans and a loose sweater, tied my hair back in a simple ponytail, and walked to campus feeling like I was heading to my own execution. I decided on my strategy during those sleepless hours: act normal. Gather information, figure out if this was salvageable or if I needed to walk away from the only friend group I had. It was a plan born from desperation and self-preservation, not courage. Part of me knew that any friendship requiring this level of performance was already dead, but I wasn't ready to accept that reality yet. I told myself I needed more information before making any permanent decisions. Maybe what I had overheard was an isolated incident, a moment of weakness where they had gotten caught up in toxic locker room talk that didn't reflect their actual feelings. Maybe they would show remorse somehow, give me a sign that they knew what they had said was wrong. I was grasping at straws, looking for any excuse to not have to blow up my entire social life, but I convinced myself it was strategic thinking. So I smiled when Jake waved me over at lunch, even though my stomach twisted into knots at the sight of him. He was sitting at our usual table in the campus center with that familiar grin on his face, acting like everything was perfectly normal because for him it was. I forced my feet to move in his direction, forced my face into an expression of casual friendliness, forced down the urge to scream at him about what I had heard. The walk across that dining hall felt like miles, even though it was probably only 30 feet. Every step was an act of will. Every second I maintained my smile felt like running a marathon. When I reached the table and slid into my usual seat, Jake immediately started telling me about something funny that had happened in his economics class, and I nodded along like I cared. Like his words weren't just empty sounds coming from a person I no longer trusted. I laughed at Marcus's jokes even though nothing felt funny anymore, even though the sound of my own laughter felt hollow and false in my ears. He was in rare form that day, telling story after story that had the whole table cracking up, and I played my part perfectly. I laughed at the right moments, made appropriate comments, contributed to the conversation in all the ways they expected. On the outside, I looked like myself, but inside I felt like I was piloting my body remotely, watching from a distance as this other version of me performed friendship for an audience that had no idea they were being studied. Marcus seemed pleased with himself, riding high on the attention and laughter, completely oblivious to the fact that one person at the table was analyzing every word he said for hidden meanings and ulterior motives I pretended I didn't. Notice the way their eyes tracked my movements, differently now that I knew what they were really thinking. But I noticed everything. I saw how Jake's gaze flickered down when I reached across the table for the salt shaker, how Marcus watched me stand up to throw away my trash, how Tyler's eyes followed me when I walked back from getting a refill on my drink. Had they always looked at me like this and I had just been too trusting to see it? Or was I hyper-aware now, seeing things that might not actually be there because I was looking for evidence to confirm what I already knew? Either way, it made my skin crawl. Every glance felt like an assessment, every look a judgment. And I found myself moving differently, trying to be smaller and less noticeable, even though I knew that would probably just lead to different criticisms. Tyler asked me how I was feeling, referencing the text I had sent Friday night about not feeling well, and I had to resist the urge to laugh bitterly at his fake concern. Instead, I told him I was much better, that it had just been a headache and I had needed to rest. He nodded sympathetically and said he was glad I was okay, and the performance was so convincing I almost believed he meant it. But I had heard what he really thought about me, heard him participate in that degrading conversation, and no amount of concerned questions could erase that knowledge. I wondered if this was how he treated all the girls in his life, maintaining this thoughtful, caring persona while secretly judging and objectifying them. The duplicity was masterful in a horrifying way. The conversation moved on to weekend plans, and I participated mechanically, agreeing to things I had no intention of actually doing. There was talk of another movie night, maybe going to see a band that was playing at a local bar, potentially organizing a group hike if the weather was nice. I said yes to all of it, maintaining my cover, while internally knowing that I would find excuses to back out when the time came. I couldn't imagine sitting in a dark movie theater with them again, couldn't picture myself hiking in isolated woods with people who saw me as an object rather than a person. But saying no would raise questions I wasn't prepared to answer yet. So I smiled and nodded and played the role of enthusiastic friend while counting down the minutes until I could escape. Marcus made a comment about my sweater, saying the color looked good on me and I had to analyze every word for hidden meaning. Was it a genuine compliment or was he mentally rating how it fit my body? When I thanked him, did my response sound normal or too stiff? The constant mental gymnastics were exhausting. Every interaction that used to be simple and natural now required careful calculation. I was playing chess while they thought we were playing checkers, and the cognitive load of maintaining the deception while also trying to read their true intentions was draining me faster than I had anticipated. An hour of lunch felt like a full day of emotional labor, and I still had classes and potentially more interactions with them ahead of me. Jake mentioned that I had missed some good pizza on Friday, bringing up the night I had overheard them with such casual ease that I nearly broke character. He had no idea that while he was texting me about pizza getting cold, I was sitting in a parking lot sobbing over the things he had said about me just minutes before. The disconnect between his memory of that evening and mine was so vast it felt like we were discussing two completely different events. I made myself respond with something about regretting missing it, about how I loved their usual pizza place, maintaining the fiction that Friday night had been, nothing more than an unfortunate case of not feeling well, rather than the night my entire view of our friendship imploded. Thor-HC. Lunch period finally ended and I escaped with an excuse about needing to get to the library before my next class. As I walked away from that table, I could feel their eyes on my back and wondered what they were thinking. Were they discussing me the moment I was out of earshot? Would this lunch become another data point in their ongoing analysis of my behavior and intentions? I made it around the corner and leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths and trying to calm my racing heart. I had survived the first encounter, had maintained my cover successfully, but the cost had been enormous. I felt drained and shaky, like I had just run a race or taken a difficult exam. And the worst part was knowing I would have to do this again and again, day after day, until I figured out what to do with the information I had and how to move forward with my life. I started changing small things, testing them, conducting little experiments to see if my suspicions about their true nature were accurate, or if I was letting one overheard conversation poison everything. The scientist in me needed data, needed to confirm the pattern before I could make any final decisions about what to do. So on Tuesday, I showed up to our study group wearing clothes that were completely different from my normal style. Instead of the fitted jeans and cute tops I usually wore, I dressed in an oversized hoodie that belonged to my older brother and baggy sweatpants that hid every curve of my body. I wore minimal makeup, pulled my hair into a messy bun, and essentially tried to make myself as unremarkable and unnoticeable as possible. If their comments about my clothing had been isolated observations rather than part of a larger pattern of objectification, they shouldn't care what I wore as long as I was comfortable. I wore a baggy hoodie and jeans instead of my usual style, and the reaction was immediate and telling. The moment I walked into the library study room, I saw Marcus and Tyler exchange a glance, a quick look that communicated something between them that I wasn't meant to understand. There was a beat of silence that felt awkward and heavy, and I knew they were noticing my outfit change even though nobody said anything at first. We settled into studying, pulling out textbooks and laptops, but the energy was different somehow. They were less engaged with me, less likely to make jokes or ask my opinion on things. It was subtle enough that I might have missed it before, but now that I was watching for these signs, they were glaringly obvious. My baggy clothes had somehow made me less worthy of their attention. "Why are you dressed like that?" Tyler asked after about 20 minutes, breaking the silence with a question that confirmed everything I had suspected. His tone wasn't curious or concerned, it was almost disappointed, like I had let him down somehow by not putting effort into my appearance. I looked up from my psychology textbook and met his eyes, seeing something in them that made my stomach turn. He was judging me, evaluating this choice the same way he had probably evaluated every other outfit I had ever worn around him. I forced myself to shrug casually and say something about being comfortable and not feeling like trying today. His response was a non-committal grunt, but the damage was done. He had proven that my clothes mattered to him in a way they shouldn't matter to someone who claimed to value me as a friend rather than an object. The energy at the table had shifted noticeably, and I could feel the difference in how they interacted with me. Jake was on his phone more than usual, not really participating in the study session with his typical enthusiasm. Marcus made fewer jokes and seemed generally less interested in anything I had to say. It was like my baggy outfit had made me invisible, had stripped away whatever value I held in their eyes when I wore clothes that showed my figure. The realization was devastating even though I had expected it. Some part of me had still hoped I was wrong, that I was reading too much into things. But their reaction to such a simple change in my wardrobe confirmed that their interest in my friendship was at least partially dependent on finding me physically attractive. Real friends wouldn't care if I showed up in a potato sack. I mentioned a guy from my English class asking me out, dropping the information casually into our conversation, like it was no big deal even though I was watching their reactions carefully. It wasn't entirely true. A guy from my English class had asked to study together, not really a date, but I framed it ambiguously to see how they would respond. The transformation was instantaneous and shocking in its intensity. Suddenly, all three of them were paying complete attention to me again, leaning forward with interest, asking questions about who this guy was and what I knew about him. The energy shifted immediately from disinterest to something that felt possessive and territorial. Tyler wanted to know the guy's name. Marcus asked what year he was. Jake demanded to know if I had said yes yet. Suddenly, they were possessive, warning me he probably just wants one thing, and the hypocrisy of it hit me like a physical blow. These were the same guys who had spent Friday night discussing whether I was worth hooking up with, rating my body parts, and assuming I was desperate to sleep with them based on my clothing choices. Now they were positioning themselves as my protectors, warning me about this fictional guy's intentions, as if they had any moral high ground to stand on. Jake said most guys only asked girls out for one reason, and I needed to be careful. Marcus added that college guys were notorious for leading girls on just to get physical. Tyler suggested I should probably say no unless I really knew this person well and could trust his intentions. The sheer audacity of their warnings made me want to scream. The irony was suffocating, sitting there listening to them lecture me about men's predatory behavior while knowing exactly what kind of conversations they had about women behind closed doors. They were warning me about a fictional person's potential objectification of me while actively objectifying me themselves. The cognitive dissonance should have been impossible to maintain, but they managed it effortlessly, apparently seeing no connection between their own actions and the behavior they were cautioning me against. In their minds, they were the good guys, the protective friends looking out for me, completely blind to the fact that they were exactly the type of men they were warning me about. The self-delusion was impressive in the most horrible way possible. I was collecting evidence of their hypocrisy, piece by piece, building a case in my mind that grew stronger with each interaction. I had started keeping notes on my phone, documenting their reactions and comments in a private folder I titled with random letters, so no one would know what it was if they happened to see my screen. Tuesday's baggy outfit experiment got its own entry with detailed observations about their changed behavior and Tyler's comment about my clothes. The mention of a potential date was documented with direct quotes of their possessive warnings. I told myself I was gathering this evidence in case I needed it later, in case I decided to report them to someone or confront them publicly, but really I think I was just trying to maintain some sense of control in a situation where I felt powerless. But each discovery felt like another betrayal, another crack in the foundation of what I had thought was a solid friendship. Every test I conducted, every experiment I ran, proved that my worst fears were accurate and maybe even understated. They didn't see me as a complete person with thoughts and feelings and autonomy. I was a collection of parts to be evaluated, an object whose value fluctuated based on how much they enjoyed looking at me, a possession they felt entitled to guard from other men while simultaneously disrespecting me themselves. With each piece of evidence I collected, I felt a little more of my trust in people eroding away, a little more of my optimism about human relationships dying off. Wednesday, I wore something closer to my normal style, wanting to see if their interest would return, and it did exactly as predicted. Suddenly, I was visible again, worthy of their jokes and attention and inclusion in the conversation. Marcus complimented my shirt, which would have seemed nice except I now knew it probably meant he was evaluating how it fit my body. Jake asked if I wanted to grab coffee after class, an invitation that felt loaded with implications I couldn't quite name but deeply distrusted. Tyler was back to his normal friendly self, making eye contact and actually listening when I spoke. The contrast between how they treated baggy outfit me versus normal outfit me was stark and damning. Proof that their friendship came with conditions and requirements I had never agreed to. I asked them about the basketball game they had played over the weekend, shifting the conversation away from myself and my clothes and my fictional dating life. I needed a break from being the subject of analysis, needed to remember what it felt like to have a normal conversation about normal things. They launched into an enthusiastic discussion about the game, the plays they had made, the points they had scored, and for a few minutes I could almost pretend things were okay. But even then I found myself analyzing everything through this new lens, wondering if this was how they really were when they weren't thinking about women and objectification, or if this too was a performance designed to make them seem like good, normal guys who could talk about things other than girls' bodies and clothing. Then Sarah noticed, and I hadn't expected anyone to see through the performance I had been working so hard to maintain. We weren't close, just friendly acquaintances who sat near each other in our psychology class and occasionally made small talk before the lecture started. She was one of those people who seemed to genuinely see others, who paid attention to the details most people missed, and apparently she had been watching me struggle even when I thought I was hiding it well. It was Thursday afternoon, and I had just finished giving a presentation on cognitive dissonance that felt painfully ironic given my current situation. I was gathering my things, preparing to leave and face another exhausting lunch with the guys, when I felt a hand on my arm and turned to see Sarah looking at me with concern in her eyes. She pulled me aside after class, steering me toward a quiet corner of the hallway away from the stream of students heading to their next destinations. "Are you okay?" "You seem off," she said, and the simple kindness in her voice nearly broke me right there in the corridor. Nobody else had noticed, or at least nobody else had cared enough to ask. My roommate had been too busy with her own life to pick up on my distress. My family was hours away, and I had been carefully upbeat during our phone calls to avoid worrying them. The guys certainly hadn't noticed anything wrong because they were too busy evaluating my outfits and feeling possessive about my dating life. But Sarah, someone I barely knew, had seen through my mask and cared enough to check if I was okay. That small act of human decency after a week of emotional torture made my carefully constructed walls start to crumble. Maybe it was because she was a girl, or maybe I was just desperate to tell someone. But it all came spilling out before I could stop myself. We ended up sitting on a bench outside the building, and I told her everything. About overhearing the conversation at Jake's apartment, about the things they had said about my body and my clothes and their assumptions about my intentions, about the sleepless nights and the performance I had been maintaining and the tests I had been running to confirm my suspicions, about feeling crazy and alone and not knowing who to trust or what to do with this information that was eating me alive from the inside. The words poured out in a rush, sometimes coherent and sometimes jumbled, and I couldn't have stopped them if I tried. It felt like lancing a wound that had been festering, painful but necessary. Her face darkened as I spoke, her expression shifting from concern to anger to something that looked like recognition. She didn't interrupt or ask clarifying questions or suggest that maybe I had misunderstood. She just listened, really listened, nodding occasionally and maintaining eye contact in a way that made me feel heard for the first time since Friday night. When I finally ran out of words and sat there feeling exposed and vulnerable, worried that I had overshared with someone who might not believe me or who might think I was being dramatic, she reached over and squeezed my hand. The gesture was simple, but it meant everything in that moment. She believed me. I could see it in her eyes before she even opened her mouth to speak. "I believe you," she said simply. And those 3 words lifted a weight off my chest that I hadn't fully realized I was carrying. There was no hesitation, no doubt, no suggestion that I might have misheard or taken things out of context. Just clear, straightforward belief in my experience and my perception of what had happened. After days of questioning myself, of wondering if I was overreacting or being too sensitive, having someone validate my feelings without reservation was like finally being able to breathe properly again. Tears started forming in my eyes and I blinked them back furiously, not wanting to cry in public, but a few escaped anyway, and Sarah didn't make me feel bad about it. She just pulled a pack of tissues from her bag and handed them to me like this was a completely normal Thursday afternoon conversation. "And I'm not surprised," she continued, and something in her tone made me look up sharply. There was a darkness in her expression that suggested she had her own stories, her own experiences with these guys or people like them. My roommate dated Jake last year. He said similar things about her after they broke up. The words hung in the air between us, and I felt my stomach drop even though I had already known these guys were not who they pretended to be. Hearing that there was another victim, another girl who had been hurt by their toxic behavior, made it all more real somehow. This wasn't just about me and my hurt feelings. This was a pattern, a systematic way of treating women that had probably been going on for years. I wasn't alone. That realization was both comforting and horrifying, a complicated mix of emotions that I couldn't fully process in the moment. Comforting because it meant I wasn't crazy, I hadn't misunderstood, and there was someone else who could corroborate that these guys were exactly as terrible as I now knew them to be. But horrifying because it meant Jake had done this before, had probably done this to multiple girls, and nobody had stopped him. How many others were there? How many girls had he charmed and dated and then talked about in degrading ways once the relationship ended? And if Jake had this pattern, what about Marcus and Tyler? Were there other victims of their toxic masculinity and objectification waiting in the shadows, too afraid or ashamed to speak up? Sarah could see the thoughts racing across my face, and she leaned forward, her voice low and serious. "Her name is Emma, and she lives in my dorm. After they broke up, Jake told everyone she was clingy and desperate, that she had pushed for the relationship to be more serious than he wanted. But Emma told me what really happened. He was amazing at first. Then he started making comments about her clothes and her body, suggesting she should dress differently or lose weight. When she pushed back, he got mean. After the breakup, he told all his friends she was bad in bed and had been pressuring him for sex constantly, none of which was true. She was devastated and ended up transferring to a different school second semester because she couldn't handle seeing him around campus. The story made me feel sick, but also validated everything I had been thinking and feeling. Jake wasn't just a guy who made inappropriate comments with his friends. He was someone who systematically hurt women, who used his charm and popularity as weapons, who destroyed reputations and caused real harm without any apparent remorse. And he had almost gotten away with doing the same thing to me. If I hadn't overheard that conversation, if I had continued trusting him, who knows what would have happened? Would he have eventually asked me out, started criticizing my appearance, then painted me as the villain when I inevitably failed to meet his impossible standards? The thought made my hands shake with anger and residual fear. Why didn't anyone do anything? I asked, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. If Emma told people what happened, why is Jake still popular? Why does everyone still think he's such a great guy? Sarah's expression turned bitter and she shook her head slowly. She tried. She told a few people the truth, but he got ahead of the story. He painted her as a crazy ex who couldn't handle being dumped. His friends backed him up, said she was making things up for attention. You know how it goes. People believe the version of the story that fits their existing perceptions. And everyone already loved Jake. It was easier to believe Emma was lying than to accept that their friend was capable of that kind of cruelty. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing the implications. The system was rigged in their favor, I realized. Guys like Jake and Marcus and Tyler could say and do terrible things to women and face zero consequences because they had carefully cultivated these personas as good guys. They volunteered and held doors and made people laugh, and those surface actions provided enough cover that people didn't want to look deeper. Anyone who tried to expose the truth would be dismissed as bitter or crazy or attention-seeking. It was a perfect protection system, and they probably didn't even realize how deliberately they had constructed it. Or maybe they did realize it, and that made it even worse. "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked gently, pulling me back from my dark thoughts. It was the question I had been avoiding all week, the decision I wasn't ready to make. I could walk away quietly, ghost them, and rebuild my social life from scratch, but that felt like letting them win. I could confront them privately, but based on Emma's experience, they would just deny everything and make me look like the problem. Or I could do something more public, more permanent, something that would make it impossible for them to hurt another girl the same way. The idea terrified me, but also felt right somehow, like it was the only choice that honored the pain they had caused. I looked at Sarah and saw understanding in her eyes. Whatever I decided, I wouldn't have to do it alone anymore. Sarah helped me plan, and having her support made something that had seemed impossible suddenly feel achievable, even if it was still terrifying. We met at a coffee shop off campus the next day, somewhere we wouldn't run into anyone we knew, and spread out our options like we were planning a military operation. Sarah had brought her laptop and a notebook, approaching this with a seriousness that made me feel less crazy for caring so much. She'd even talked to Emma the night before, and her roommate had given permission for me to share her story if it would help. Knowing that another victim was willing to stand with me even from a distance gave me courage I didn't know I had. We ordered coffee and found a corner table where we could talk privately, and Sarah pulled up a document she had already started outlining possible approaches. "I could ghost them," she said, pulling up the first option on her screen. "Just slowly fade out of the friend group, stop responding to messages, make excuses until they got the hint, and stopped including me." It was the safest option, the path of least resistance that would let me escape without direct confrontation. But Sarah pointed out the obvious flaw, the same concern that had been nagging at me all week. They would just make up stories about why I had disappeared. They would control the narrative, probably paint me as flaky or dramatic or having gone through some kind of breakdown. I would lose the friend group either way, but this option meant I would also lose my reputation, and they would face zero consequences for their behavior. They would move on to the next girl, have the same degrading conversations about her, and the cycle would continue unchanged. But they'd just make up stories about why, I acknowledged, repeating what Sarah had said because it was the truth I had been trying to avoid. I had seen how Jake handled Emma's departure, the story he had told about her that made him look like the victim, and her look unstable. He was good at spinning narratives, at making people believe his version of events through sheer force of charisma and strategic friend backing. If I just disappeared, he would do the same thing to me. Maybe I would be the girl who had been secretly in love with him and couldn't handle his rejection, or the one who had gotten too emotional about some imagined slight and stormed off. Whatever story he told would be believable because it would confirm what people already thought, and I would have no way to counter it because I would have removed myself from the situation, or I could confront them privately and risk them gaslighting me. Sarah continued, moving to the second option with a skeptical expression that told me she didn't think much of this approach. I could ask to meet with them, tell them what I had overheard, and give them a chance to apologize and explain themselves. It was the option that felt most fair in some ways, the one that honored our friendship by giving them an opportunity to make things right before going nuclear. But Sarah had seen this play out before with Emma and knew how it would likely go. They would deny the worst of it, claim I had misunderstood or taken things out of context. They would say they were just joking around the way guys do, that it didn't mean anything, that I was being too sensitive. They might even flip it around and make me feel bad for eavesdropping or for not trusting them enough to believe their explanations. The gaslighting potential was enormous, and I could already imagine how the conversation would go. Jake would be hurt that I thought so little of him, his wounded expression making me feel guilty for even bringing it up. Marcus would laugh it off and tell me I needed to learn to take a joke, making me feel stupid for being upset. Tyler would probably go intellectual, explaining the psychology of male bonding and how trash talk about women was just a harmless social ritual that didn't reflect their actual respect for me. By the end of the conversation, I would somehow be the one apologizing, the one who had created a problem where none existed, and they would continue exactly as before but now with added resentment toward me for calling them out. Nothing would change except that I would feel even worse about the whole situation. Or, and this was her idea, I could call them out publicly, make sure everyone knew who they really were. Sarah leaned forward as she explained this option, her eyes bright with something that looked like righteous anger mixed with hope. It was the nuclear option, the one that couldn't be taken back or walked away from. I would confront them somewhere public where there would be witnesses, lay out exactly what I had overheard and what I had observed in the days since. I would connect my experience to Emma's, show that this was a pattern rather than an isolated incident. The goal would be to strip away their protective coating of popularity and charm, to make people see the ugliness underneath before they could spin their own version of events. It was aggressive and uncompromising, and Sarah clearly thought it was the only option that had any chance of creating real consequences. It was risky, I said slowly, my mind already racing through all the ways this could go wrong. The court of public opinion was unpredictable, especially on a college campus where social hierarchies were everything, and guys like Jake had spent years building up goodwill. There was a very real chance that people would take their side, would see me as bitter or vindictive or trying to ruin innocent guys' reputations over nothing. The backlash could be severe. I might lose more than just this friend group. I might become a social pariah, the girl who made false accusations, the one who couldn't take a joke and decided to destroy people's lives because of it. My college experience could become defined by this conflict, with every interaction filtered through people's perceptions of whether I was telling the truth or causing drama. It could backfire spectacularly. Sarah agreed, not sugarcoating the reality of what I would be risking. She had seen call-out attempts fail before, had watched as women who spoke up got torn apart while the men they accused faced minimal consequences. Social media could turn against me in an instant, with people I had never met forming opinions about my character based on limited information. The guys could rally their friends, could present evidence of our friendship that made my accusations seem unfounded. Screenshots of friendly text messages could be taken out of context to prove I was a willing participant in our dynamic, rather than a victim of their objectification. The whole thing could blow up in my face and leave me worse off than if I had just walked away silently. But the thought of them doing this to the next girl, of them never facing consequences, made my decision easier. That was the turning point, the moment when my fear for myself became less important than my anger about the pattern. How many Emmas were out there? How many girls had been hurt by these guys and had stayed silent because speaking up felt too dangerous? If I said nothing, if I took the safe route, I would be complicit in whatever they did next. The next girl who trusted Jake and got torn apart by his cruelty, that would be partially on me because I had the opportunity to warn people, and I had chosen my own comfort instead. I thought about my little sister, about all the young women who would come to this campus in future years, and I realized I couldn't live with myself if I didn't at least try to stop this pattern. Sarah reached across the table and grabbed my hand, squeezing it hard. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you," she said firmly. "Emma said she would back you up if needed. We can find other girls who have had bad experiences with them. You won't be doing this alone." The promise of support was everything. I knew that standing up to popular guys was nearly impossible if you were isolated, but with other voices joining mine, with a pattern that couldn't be dismissed as one girl's misunderstanding, we might actually have a chance. It wouldn't be easy and the outcome was far from guaranteed, but at least I would be able to look at myself in the mirror and know I had tried to do the right thing. We spent the next 2 hours planning the details, working out exactly how and where and when I would confront them. Sarah suggested doing it somewhere on campus where lots of people gathered, somewhere I could control the environment and have witnesses but wouldn't be causing a massive scene. The coffee shop where our group usually met seemed perfect. It was public enough that they couldn't completely deny what I said or intimidate me into backing down, but not so crowded that it would turn into pure chaos. We decided I should record the conversation on my phone, both for my own protection and as potential evidence if things escalated. Sarah helped me script out the main points I wanted to hit, the key things I needed to say to make my case clear and undeniable. By the time we finished, I felt scared, but also strangely calm, like I had finally found solid ground after weeks of feeling like I was drowning. This was going to hurt and it was going to be hard, but it was also right. I was done performing, done pretending, done protecting people who had never actually been my friends. Sarah walked me back to campus and we hugged goodbye, and she reminded me one more time that I didn't have to do this alone. That night I practiced what I was going to say, standing in front of my mirror and speaking the words out loud until they felt natural. Tomorrow everything would change, and for the first time since that terrible Friday night, I felt like I was the one in control of the narrative. I chose the campus coffee shop where our group always met, when I knew it would be crowded because I needed witnesses, and I needed the protection that came from being in a public space. It was Tuesday at noon, the busiest time of day, when students packed the tables between classes, and the noise level made private conversations impossible. I had texted the group chat that morning saying I wanted to meet up, acting completely normal, and they had all agreed enthusiastically like nothing was wrong because they had no idea what was coming. I arrived 15 minutes early to secure our usual table near the center of the room, positioning myself so I would have a clear view of the entrance, and so nearby tables would be able to hear our conversation. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but I forced myself to sit calmly and wait. I recorded the conversation on my phone in my pocket, legal in our state, making sure it was positioned correctly, and had enough battery to capture everything. Sarah had helped me research the recording laws, confirming that I only needed one-party consent, which meant I could legally record without telling them. The phone was running a voice memo app that would capture audio even if my screen was locked, and I had tested it multiple times to make sure it would work properly. This recording was my insurance policy, proof that whatever happened next actually happened the way I said it did. They couldn't gaslight me or claim I had misunderstood if I had their own voices on tape. My hand shook slightly as I adjusted the phone one final time, then I forced myself to breathe deeply and wait for them to arrive. They walked in together, laughing about something, looking relaxed and happy like this was just another normal Tuesday lunch. Jake spotted me first and waved, that charming smile on his face that I now knew was just a mask. Marcus was carrying his usual complicated coffee order, and Tyler had a backpack slung over one shoulder. They looked like such good guys, such normal college students, and I felt a moment of doubt. Was I really going to do this? Was I really going to blow up my entire social life and potentially make myself a target based on one overheard conversation and some suspicious behavior? But then I remembered Emma, remembered the pattern, remembered how comfortable they had sounded discussing my body like I was livestock, and my resolve hardened. This had to be done. I sat down and said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "So Marcus, do I still dress like a slut, or has my hoodie phase been disappointing?" The words came out steadier than I expected, clear and loud in the noisy coffee shop. I had practiced this opening line dozens of times, had workshopped it with Sarah until we agreed it was direct enough to be undeniable, but specific enough to immediately establish what this was about. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. Our table went completely silent. The laughter died on their faces like someone had flipped a switch. Marcus froze with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. Tyler's eyes went wide. Jake's smile disappeared completely, replaced by an expression of shock and dawning horror. You could hear a pin drop at our table despite the noise everywhere else in the coffee shop. The silence between the four of us was heavy and thick, stretching out for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. I could see them processing what I had just said, their brains working frantically to figure out how I knew about that conversation and what this confrontation meant. The nearby tables hadn't fully tuned in yet, but a few people had glanced over at my loud opening statement, curious about the sudden tension they could sense even from a distance. I kept my eyes locked on Marcus specifically, watching him struggle to find a response, watching the calculation happening behind his eyes as he tried to figure out his next move. Their faces went white, then red, the blood draining away and then rushing back as shock gave way to embarrassment and anger. It was fascinating in a horrible way, watching the physiological response to being caught. Marcus set his coffee down carefully, his hand trembling slightly. Tyler looked down at the table like he couldn't meet my eyes. Jake's face was cycling through emotions so quickly I couldn't track them all. Surprise, confusion, denial, anger, fear. They were used to being in control of situations, used to their charm and popularity protecting them from consequences, and having that control suddenly ripped away was clearly disorienting. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and we all knew it. "What are you?" Jake started, trying to recover, trying to take control of the situation with that same confident tone he always used when he wanted to manage a situation. But I wasn't going to let him finish, wasn't going to give him the chance to spin this or redirect the conversation. "I heard you," I cut him off, my voice still loud and clear, making sure people around us could hear. 2 weeks ago? Everything you said about me." I watched his face go from red to pale again as he realized I wasn't bluffing, that I had actually overheard that Friday night conversation. His mouth opened and closed a few times, searching for words that wouldn't come. The confident mask had cracked completely, and underneath it I could see panic. "I came back to Jake's apartment to get my phone and the door was still open," I continued, not giving any of them time to formulate a response. "I heard you talking about how I dress like I'm begging for it, how I'm probably desperate to sleep with one of you, how you rated my body like I was livestock." My voice was shaking now, but not with fear, with anger, with the accumulated hurt and betrayal of 2 weeks. People at nearby tables were definitely listening now, conversations pausing as they picked up on the dramatic confrontation happening in their midst. I could see phones coming out, could feel the attention of the room shifting toward us, and I knew there was no going back now. They tried to laugh it off, to spin it as a joke I'd misunderstood, exactly as Sarah had predicted they would. Marcus was the first to attempt it, forcing a chuckle that sounded hollow and desperate. "Come on, we were just messing around," he said, his voice too loud and too casual. "You know how guys talk, it doesn't mean anything." Jake jumped in to support him, saying something about locker room talk and how I was taking it too seriously. Tyler tried a different approach, looking hurt and saying he couldn't believe I had been eavesdropping on a private conversation and was now making a big deal out of context. They were tag-teaming the gaslighting, each one contributing to the narrative that I was the problem, not them, but I didn't let them. I had prepared for this, had anticipated every excuse and deflection they might try. "It wasn't a joke," I said firmly, cutting through their attempts to minimize what had happened. "You spent 20 minutes discussing my body, my clothes, which one of you I wanted to sleep with. You said girls who dress like me are usually easy. You debated whether I was worth hooking up with." I was laying out the specifics now, making it impossible for them to claim I had misunderstood or taken something out of context. The more specific I was, the harder it would be for them to deny. People around us had gone completely silent now, openly staring at our table as this confrontation played out. I laid it all out, calm and clear, as people around us started paying attention, the specifics of what they had said and the pattern of behavior I had observed since then. I told them about Emma, about how Jake had done the same thing to her before destroying her reputation after their breakup. I described the tests I had run, how their behavior toward me changed based on what I wore, how they became possessive and territorial when I mentioned another guy. I kept my voice level and factual, presenting evidence like I was giving a presentation in class, because I knew that getting emotional would give them ammunition to claim I was being irrational or dramatic. Sarah had coached me on this: stay calm, stick to facts, don't let them make it about your emotional response instead of their actions. The coffee shop had gotten eerily quiet now, with most of the nearby conversations stopped completely as people listened to this drama unfold. I could see phones being held up, and I realized people were probably recording this or at least taking notes to share later. Part of me was horrified at the public spectacle, but the bigger part was grimly satisfied. This was exactly what I needed: witnesses, documentation, public accountability. Jake was looking around frantically, clearly aware that whatever happened next would be shared across campus within hours. Marcus had his head in his hands, and Tyler was staring at me with something that looked like hatred. The masks were completely off now, and everyone could see who they really were underneath the charm. They never apologized. Not really, and that lack of genuine remorse told me everything I needed to know about who they truly were beneath the surface. In the immediate aftermath of my public confrontation, as the coffee shop buzzed with shocked whispers and the reality of what had just happened settled over us, Jake made an attempt at damage control that was so transparently insincere it almost made me laugh. He said something about how he was sorry I felt hurt, carefully wording it to avoid actually taking responsibility for his actions. It was the classic non-apology, the kind that put the blame on my feelings rather than on their behavior. Marcus mumbled something about not meaning it the way it sounded, and Tyler just sat there in stony silence, refusing to engage at all. None of them could look me in the eye, and none of them said the words that actually mattered. I'm sorry for what I said. It was wrong, and I take full responsibility. They made excuses, blamed alcohol, said I was being too sensitive, cycling through every predictable deflection in the gaslighter's playbook. Jake claimed they had been drinking that night, as if being drunk somehow made objectifying women acceptable or erased the harm of their words. Marcus said it was just the kind of thing guys say when they're alone, that every man talks like that, and I was naive to be shocked by it. Tyler finally spoke up to say that I was overreacting, that I had taken a private conversation and blown it completely out of proportion by making this public scene. They were trying to shift the narrative even as it was collapsing around them, trying to make this about my sensitivity or my violation of their privacy, rather than about their degrading treatment of women. But the people listening weren't buying it anymore. I could see it in their faces, but the damage was done, and they couldn't put the genie back in the bottle no matter how hard they tried to spin the story afterward. Within hours, videos and accounts of the coffee shop confrontation had spread across campus social media. People were talking about it in classes, in dorms, in group chats. The protective bubble of popularity that had surrounded them for years had finally burst, and everyone could see the ugliness underneath. They tried to control the narrative on their own social media, posting vague statements about being targeted and misunderstood, but it was too late. The court of public opinion had turned, and their carefully constructed images as nice guys were crumbling in real time. I watched it happen from a distance, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. Other girls started coming forward with their own stories about these nice guys, and that was when I realized just how deep the pattern went. Sarah connected me with Emma, who wrote a long post about her experience with Jake that corroborated everything I had said and added even more disturbing details. A girl from Marcus's study group came forward to say he had made constant comments about her body and had tried to pressure her into hooking up with him. Someone from Tyler's dorm shared screenshots of messages where he had rated girls in their residence hall and shared the ratings with other guys. Each new story was another piece of evidence that this wasn't about me being too sensitive or misunderstanding innocent comments. This was a systemic pattern of treating women as objects rather than people. The stories kept coming for days, a flood of experiences from girls who had been waiting for someone to speak up first so they wouldn't have to stand alone. Some were dramatic and obviously harmful, like the girl who said Jake had spread rumors about her sexual history after she rejected him. Others were smaller but equally telling, like the multiple women who mentioned Marcus making them uncomfortable with constant comments about their appearance. Reading through all these accounts was both validating and heartbreaking. Validating because it proved I had been right to speak up, but heartbreaking because it showed just how many people had been hurt by these guys over the years. How different would things have been if someone had called them out sooner? I lost my friend group, but I gained something more valuable: self-respect and real friends who saw me as a person, not a collection of assumptions. The immediate aftermath was lonely in a way I hadn't fully anticipated. Suddenly, the people I had spent most of my time with for 2 years were gone from my life, and the hole they left was enormous even though I knew they had never really been my friends. My daily routine had to change completely because it had been built around their schedules and preferences. I no longer had a ready-made group to sit with at lunch or study with in the library or hang out with on weekends. For a few weeks, I felt adrift and isolated, questioning whether speaking up had been worth this loneliness, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake that would define my college experience in the worst possible way. But slowly, gradually, something better started to grow in the space where that toxic friendship had been. Sarah and I became close, spending more and more time together as she introduced me to her friend group and helped me navigate this strange new social landscape. Her friends were different from Jake and Marcus and Tyler. They asked about my thoughts and opinions. They noticed when I was upset or excited. They treated me like a whole person with value beyond my physical appearance. Conversations felt different, lighter somehow, without the constant undercurrent of being evaluated and judged. I could wear whatever I wanted without analyzing how it would be interpreted. I could talk about my life without everything being twisted into evidence of some hidden agenda. It was like finally being able to breathe after holding my breath for 2 years. Sarah and I became close in a way that felt fundamentally different from my friendship with the guys had ever been. There was a depth and authenticity to our connection that I realized had been missing from those other relationships. We could talk about real things, our fears, our dreams, our insecurities, without judgment or competition. She supported me through the difficult weeks after the confrontation, when the social fallout was at its worst and I was second-guessing everything. She celebrated with me when other girls came forward and the pattern became undeniable. She helped me process the complex emotions of grief and anger and relief that came with losing people who had never actually valued me. Having a real friend, someone who genuinely cared about my well-being, showed me just how hollow my previous friendships had been. I joined new clubs, met new people, and discovered parts of myself that had been suppressed or ignored during my time with the guys. I started going to the creative writing club that Sarah had recommended, something I had always been interested in but hadn't pursued because the guys thought it was pretentious. I volunteered with an organization that mentored high school girls, finding purpose in helping younger women develop confidence and self-worth. I took a dance class just for fun, not worrying about what anyone would say about the outfit or my body. Each new experience was a revelation, showing me how much I had been limiting myself to fit into a friendship that was never good for me in the first place. I was becoming more fully myself than I had been in years, and I learned that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is also the thing that sets you free. The betrayal of discovering what those guys really thought about me had been devastating, one of the most painful experiences of my life. But it had also broken me out of a situation that was slowly eroding my self-worth without me even realizing it. If I hadn't overheard that conversation, I might have stayed in that friend group for years, gradually internalizing their objectification, slowly learning to see myself through their degrading lens. I might have ended up like Emma, dating one of them and having my self-esteem systematically destroyed. The pain of the betrayal had been sharp and immediate, but staying would have been a slower, more insidious kind of harm. I thought they were my friends, and losing that hurt more than I could have imagined at the time. There were still moments, even months later, when I would see something funny and instinctively think about sharing it with the group, only to remember that the group no longer existed. There were inside jokes that would pop into my head with nowhere to go, references that only they would understand. I grieved the loss of what I thought we had, even knowing it had never been real. The betrayal wasn't just about what they said, it was about the time I had invested, the trust I had given, the version of reality I had believed in that turned out to be completely false. That kind of loss leaves a mark, changes how you see relationships and trust people going forward, but discovering who they really were? That was the gift hidden in the pain, the silver lining that made the whole terrible experience worth something in the end. Knowing the truth meant I could make informed decisions about who to trust and who to keep at a distance. It taught me to pay attention to red flags, to trust my instincts when something felt off, to value authenticity over popularity. It showed me that I was stronger than I thought, capable of standing up for myself even when it was terrifying and costly. It connected me with other women who had similar experiences, building a community based on mutual support rather than superficial charm. Most importantly, it freed me from the exhausting performance of trying to be acceptable to people who were never going to truly value me anyway. The guys faced real consequences, though perhaps not as severe as they deserved. They lost some of their social status and had to deal with their reputations being tarnished, but they weren't expelled or formally disciplined by the school. Some people still defended them, still believed their version of events, or thought the whole thing was blown out of proportion. But enough people saw the truth that they could no longer operate with the same impunity. Other women knew to be cautious around them. Their future victims, if there were any, would at least have warnings and wouldn't go in completely blind the way Emma and I had. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something, and for me personally, the biggest victory wasn't about what happened to them. It was about what I had reclaimed for myself. My voice, my truth, my right to be treated with basic respect and dignity. Those were gifts worth any amount of pain.